The universe, which others call the library, is composed of an indefinite, perhaps infinite, number of hexagonal galleries. In the center of each gallery is a ventilation shaft, bounded by a low railing. From any hexagon, one can see the floors above and below, one after another, endlessly. The arrangement of the galleries is always the same. 20 bookshelves, 5 to each side, line 4 of the hexagon's 6 sides. The height of the bookshelves, floor to ceiling, is hardly greater than the height of a normal librarian. One of the hexagon's 3 sides opens onto a narrow sort of vestibule, which in turn opens onto another gallery, identical to the first, identical, in fact, to all. Through this space too, there passes a spiral staircase, which winds upward and downward into the remotest distance. In the vestibule there is a mirror, which faithfully duplicates appearances. Men often infer from this mirror that the library is not infinite. If it were, what need would there be for the illusory replication? I prefer to dream that burnished surfaces are a figuration and promise of the infinite. Light is provided by certain spherical fruits that bear the name bulbs. There are 2 of these bulbs in each hexagon, set crosswise. The light that they give is insufficient and unceasing. The Library of Babel, 1941. Unceasing indeed. In the 2010s, Jonathan Basile coded Libraryofbabel.info. In 1941, La Biblioteca de Babel was published in Spanish. In 1939, Jorge Luis Borges wrote The Total Library. In 1904, Kurt Laswitz wrote Die Universal Bibliothek, the Universal Library. And, well, the rest has already been written. All attempts at crafting the total library, a massive, but not infinite library that would contain every possible book, up to certain confines within the formatting of the books included within the library. An idea incredibly interesting on the surface, amazingly messy within, and built upon a complicated history of publication. The website, Libraryofbabel.info by Jonathan Basile, is the best working concept of the idea, though, as the website readily admits, the modern idea comes from the Argentine writer Jorge Luis Borges. Borges too admitted he did not invent the thought experiment. The first publication of the total library theory, as more than just a mathematical exercise, was the father of German science fiction Kurt Laswitz. Unfortunately, I'm not good at numbers. Luckily, the history is so large this video will speak more to the evolution of the concept to the internet website. Now, since this script is already cataloged in that total library, let's find out which copy it is. To begin, like in the library, there is no original idea. Borges cataloged the history of the concept in his essay The Total Library, so this will follow an abridged explanation of his chronology. Before that though, didn't Vsauce man Michael already talk about this? Well, yes, Vsauce did briefly discuss Libraryofbabel.info, but in a more general manner. This video will more discuss how the concept of the total library came to be. Basile's website is due to the infrequent evolution of the concept throughout literary history. Ironically enough, the concept of the total library, in method, probably predates most written language. Borges indirectly traces its origins to the Greek pre-Socratics, the atomists to be exact. The atomists believed in, well, atoms. Atoms to them were the basic element of all matter. Atomism probably originated with Moccus of Sidon, considered the first ever chemist, but due to his obscurity, the idea is credited to the better attested Greeks Leucippus and Democritus. Due to the pagan beliefs in the cyclical nature of the universe, the atomists argued, due to the random movement of these minuscule atoms, the universe would occur again and again infinitely in random combinations. Everything was destined, or doomed, to repeat again and again in this mechanical process. The idea extrapolated on by later philosophers as the eternal recurrence or eternal return. Arguments that would, ironically enough, repeat again and again throughout the classical and medieval worlds. Christianity would challenge the idea by proclaiming the end of the universe in the final judgment, but the idea of the eternal recurrence would not end. Though not yet a library, the possibility of what could happen throughout all eternity was there. Borges argues the first literary gesture towards the infinite library occurred with Charles Lutwidge Dodgson, better known as Lewis Carroll, in his 1889 novel Sylvie and Bruno. A classic Carroll book, that's first volume, acts as Carroll's social commentary on Victorian England. In one section, it contemplates the ever-changing role of the writer against industrial technology and time. The book questions if one day all possible combinations of words will be exhausted. Or, as Borges puts it, that as the number of words in any language is limited, so too is the number of their possible combinations or of their books. Thus, all creativity will be void as the author will no longer be able to write anything new. They could only rearrange the order of these words. As the book asks, the question shall not be, "What book shall I write?" but simply, "What book?" Credit then goes to the German writer, mathematician, librarian Kurt Laswitz for being the first literary exponent of the total library concept in itself. Laswitz called his 1904 short story, The Universal Library, a scientific fairy tale, perhaps better called a piece of speculative fiction today. Unfortunately, due to the story's rather bland prose, it has had a troubled translation history. The 1958 English translation is rather egregious for its heavy abridgment. Most English translations remove the basic plot and turn it into a simple thought experiment, meaning the actual story is not that well known beyond Germany. It features a Professor Wallhausen discussing with his friend Max Berkel and family about how the number of possible combinations of a given number of letters is limited. Therefore, all possible literature must be able to be put down in a finite number of volumes, which gives rise to the concept of the total library. They then decide that by logarithms, later algorithms, one could use a 100-character alphabet of letters, upper and lowercase Latin letters, numbers, and grammatical marks to generate every possible book by mechanical process. Using this idea, the group eventually decide upon setting each book in the library as a volume of 500 pages with 40 lines of 50 characters per page, which, by 40 times 50 times 500 letters, gives you 1 million characters per book, all repeated in a random order again and again in each book. This process would generate every possible book: the Bible, Shakespeare, your own favorite book, and every living author dead or not, or ones that had never even existed. But it would also generate far more nonsense. Books could be finished between volumes and spaces could fill books, but nearly all the books would be random combinations of arbitrary letters without meaning. Literally just typographical noise. Or, as Berkel says in the story, "So I won't subscribe to the Universal Library, since it would be impossible to pick out the sense from the nonsense, the true from the false. Were I to find however many million volumes all claiming to contain the true history of the German Empire in the 20th century, and all completely contradicting each other, then I could just as easily take up the works of historians themselves. I'll pass." Mathematically, according to Laswitz, this would generate a library of 10 to the power of 2 million books. Take this concept and apply it to every possible example of writing. Technically, the library would not be infinite, but it would be near incomprehensible, and no human could possibly understand it in its totality. Either way, outside his native Germany, Laswitz's scientific fairy tale received little attention until Borges published his own interpretation of the idea in his own essay The Total Library and the short story The Library of Babel. While I am not 100% sure, I believe Borges first read Laswitz's story, probably in the original German, while he was working at the Municipal Library in Buenos Aires in the late 1930s. While working at the library, Borges one day cataloged 500 books in a day, only to be chewed out by his coworkers for doing too much work. They told Borges cataloging more than 100 books a day made them superfluous and put their jobs at risk. After that, Borges took only an hour per day to catalog 100 books, then spent the rest of it reading, writing, and translating within the library. It was Borges' time in the municipal library that heavily influenced his interpretation of the total library. It was, as George R. McMurray wrote, the boredom and despair Borges felt while working as a library clerk between 1937 and 1946 that would inspire him in writing his short story and essay. Already going blind by the 1940s, Borges suffered a head injury working one day which led to a severe blood infection. As his sight decreased in the succeeding years, he suffered nightmares of infinite repetition. In these dreams, he would exit a room only to find himself in the same one, he would turn down a street only to find himself on the same street, and he would wander through a foggy swamp only to find himself once again by the same tree. This infinite repetition manifested itself in Borges' writing through his trademark themes, or obsession with, mirrors, labyrinths, and the concept of infinity itself. In 1939, then, Borges finally decided to write his brief, 3-page essay, The Total Library, an elaboration on what today is called the infinite monkey theorem, the theory that, given eternity, a group of monkeys could write Shakespeare, though, as Borges said, one immortal monkey would also do. The essay is an elaboration on Laswitz's ideas. Borges adds his own spin to the interpretation of Laswitz's alphabet, or the universal orthographic symbols. The alphabet, he says, could be reduced to 25 symbols. Borges creates a simplified version of the Latin alphabet. As he says Q and X are unnecessary, punctuation could be reduced to the comma and period, as well as technically the space, and every book could be written in capital letters with numbers expressed only through letters. By these 25 symbols, according to Borges, one could create a library similar to Laswitz's, but, like Laswitz, Borges concluded the essay with the dire warning: "One of the habits of the mind is the invention of horrible imaginings. The mind has invented hell. It has invented predestination to hell. It has imagined the Platonic ideas, the chimera, the sphinx, abnormal, trans-finite numbers, whose parts are no smaller than the whole. Masks, mirrors, operas, the teratological trinity, the Father, the Son, and the unresolvable ghost, articulated into a single organism." 2 years later, Borges would adopt these ideas into La Biblioteca de Babel, or the Library of Babel. The story comes from Borges' early fantastical/speculative period as a writer, stories used to escape the boredom of the municipal library and his declining eyesight at the time. The main character of the story is a librarian, going blind, who wanders the halls of the infinite library in search of any meaning, its shelves filled with books that follow Borges' reduced alphabet. Each wall of each hexagon is furnished with 5 bookshelves. Each bookshelf holds 32 books, identical in format. Each book contains 410 pages, each page 40 lines, each line approximately 80 black letters. There are also letters on the front cover of each book. Those letters neither indicate nor prefigure what the pages inside will say. By 410 times 40 times 80, we come to 1,312,000 characters per book. As there are 25 characters within the library, this becomes 25 raised to the power of 1,312,000. A nightmare of the total library from Borges' dream, though, as the story says, a number which, though unimaginably vast, is not infinite. There is some mystery to Borges' library, though, as Jonathan Basile notes in his book Tar for Mortar. Borges' library likely does not employ either the Spanish or English alphabet, as we understand them. The English alphabet has 26 letters, and the Spanish alphabet technically has 30. Even removing Q and X from both, English still has 24 letters and Spanish 28. This becomes even more mysterious when a Germanic umlaut letter, appears in one of the library's books. The story opens with a bizarre quote, "By this art you may contemplate the variation of the 23 letters." But what are the 22 letters of the library Borges notes? Some propose the Hebrew alphabet, which would fit the number. This would fit the mystical nature of the universal library, perhaps serving as a reference to the mystical randomness of the Jewish Kabbalah, a sealed universe that can only be understood by interpreting divine will and pure randomness or text. Much of the short story appears to intend to trick the reader in a certain way. Maybe. Borges did publish a revised version of the story intended to clarify the description of the library's structure. This is odd for an author known for his exactness in language and English translations. Borges' description of the library's identical hexagons have only one passage, sometimes revised to 2, that open onto a gallery. Either way, this means the library, as often imagined, could only expand in one horizontal direction. One could only move between 2 hexagons through the gallery. Several architects have attempted to solve this conundrum. Christina Grau, in Borges y la Arquitectura, proposed her own diagram of the library's structure where the galleries connect the hexagons, an attempt to make sense of Borges' description. Then, in response to Grau, Antonio Toca Fernandez proposed his own diagram. Fernandez argues all sides of the gallery open onto a hexagon, which are still only connected by 2 passageways. This means the gallery is opened on all sides, and is less a passageway and more a room. On Libraryofbabel.info, user Will H suggested a solution where each hexagon opens onto a central gallery and is connected by an open passageway. The issue with this solution comes from Borges' own explanation for the library. I thought in the beginning of a series of circles, because the circle produces the sensation of the lack of orientation, but the circles leave spaces between them that disturbed me. Later, I decided on hexagons because they fit together with each other without needing other figures. This then means there should be no unused space between the interlocked hexagons and galleries. The library's architecture becomes nightmarish, as it is perhaps not meant to make sense, a reflection of Borges' own dreams of impossible recurrence. Either way, all these physical arguments have little bearing on Jonathan Basil's digital Library of Babel, though Basil was interested in this debate. Basil, a PhD student in comparative literature, learned to code just to create the website. Originally, he attempted to store/generate every possible book to Borges' specifications on his computer. He quickly learned, though, this would require more storage space than physically possible, and maybe more storage space than would be allowed in the physical universe. Instead, Basil turned towards an algorithm to generate all the library's 10 to the 4,677th power books. The universe only has 10 to the 80 power atoms. Though, due to the algorithm, this means the books only exist when accessed, but their locations do not change. The website accesses an index number, retrieves it, and the set books always remain static, or as Basil described in Tar for Mortar, this random seeming output is then converted into a page of text, a base 29 number. The PRNG, pseudo-random number generator, algorithm I used is invertible, which means that one can take a page of text and run the formula backwards to calculate its index in the library. This is how a search is performed. This means each book exists as much as a PDF does on your computer. Basil's library then runs as an always consistent algorithm. Though, it should be noted, Library-of-Babel.info is not as pure as Borges' library. 1, because it is digital, and 2, Basil programmed it so no two books within the library share a page. The ramifications of this are incredibly interesting, and as of now, largely unexplored. If Basil owns this infinite library, then he owns the copyright to every book not yet written within it, but he also violates the copyright of every book written within it. This video's entire script, and every comment on it, are somewhere in the library. Somewhere. Though, according to Eliott72 on r/Babel forum, your chance of finding any logical sentence in the library by searching naturally is this number, which I'm not even going to try to pronounce. A number that is essentially null, but still not technically zero, but it might as well be. As, since the library is still finite, it can be reduced to zero. This even carries over to the image archive, or as I like to call it, the Gallery of Babel, which includes every image possible, but is always radiostatic to the intrepid explorer. Technically, every possible picture exists somewhere in this mess, but you will never see it. Even the frame to this second in this exact video exists somewhere in these color combinations. There's really no other way to appreciate it, or be horrified by it, than to visit the library yourself. You don't even need a library card. It is linked in the description, and if you want, you can try to sift through the infinite sands with a new appreciation of its history. It's very much in the footsteps of giants sort of thing, but the footsteps of the past have all been lost in the sheer vastness of the desert. The idea has influenced a near endless stream of web widgets, flash games, and indie game interpretations. Jonathan Basil's website remains the most definite interpretation on the internet, though. But another interesting example, though not the most accurate to the concept, is the brief indie game Library of Babel by Nothic, which you have been seeing footage of. The game makes use of multiple languages, Markov text generation chains, and only has one level though, so it is nowhere near as close to the source as Basil's library, or by any manner statistically pure. But it takes these creative liberties to make itself more engaging with a unique identity. It is somewhat amusing the internet has allowed multiple Libraries of Babel to proliferate. More than one infinite library circulated on the web. Borges would, I imagine, maybe laugh or maybe be horrified. The library is not the internet, though. That is one common comparison that is in no way correct. No matter how long it may persist, the internet will probably never be able to rival the total library in its totality. The insurmountable noise to the microscopic signal. The internet speaks back, the library simply stands in its almost infinity. A sphere whose exact center is any hexagon and whose circumference is unattainable. The library becomes a Rorschach test for the world, if not some cipher for the world itself. People will either be terrified, amazed, or look up memes within it. The number is always technically never zero, though it might as well be. As Borges put it, there's always a little of the Library of Babel there, there's always a little of the machine.
Personally, I wouldn't mind being executed. In fact, I think I would welcome it, since I'm rather tired of life.
Now that we've come to the end of that sequence, I'd like to thank my patron, The Single Way Out.